So you're probably asking by now, why don't we have a market for private long-term care insurance, given that clearly this risk is random and it's small and widely shared out there in the population? Well, the answer is that most people are very unaware of the risks of needing long-term care or the amount of monies that could be involved that we've just been discussing. Moreover, most people, probably most of you listening to this, really don't want to think about getting old and needing help with these activities of daily living, which we just take for granted. We cannot or do not want to imagine ourselves as maybe arthritic or having some level of dementia and not being able to handle our finances or not being able to use our cell phones. They really just don't want to believe that they're going to need long-term care. So that's a big problem. Second is that the conditions are missing for what economists would term an efficient private market. And in particular, that means that information about what kinds of services may be needed 20 or 30 years from now. So if you're talking to a 50-year-old saying you ought to be thinking about long-term care insurance, it's almost impossible for most 50-year-olds to think about what kinds of services will be needed when they're 80 or 85 or 90. We don't even know what kinds of medical problems people will still be facing 30, 40 years from now. For example, it could be that many of the types of cancer that right now people live with as a chronic condition, maybe we'll have a vaccine for some of these cancers and it won't be a chronic condition anymore and people will not need help with some of these activities of daily living. On the other hand, if we do in fact have such a vaccine or figure out better ways for dealing with cancer or ALS, multiple sclerosis, we may end up with a population age 90 or 95 who've lived that long who have dementia. And they're going to need help with some of these long-term care services. So both the individual trying to imagine what the world will look like in 30 or 40 years and insurance companies trying to think about what types of services are likely to be needed, how much will they cost. On both the supply and the demand side of this market, we have a big problem with the information. And just to make this point even clearer, if you think back over the last 40 or 50 years and the enormous changes in medicine that we've had here in the United States, flip that 50 years the other direction and it gives you a really good idea of how difficult it is, both for individuals and for insurance companies, to imagine what types of medical problems and what types of services will be needed to deal with those medical problems. So the product that we're talking about is very unclear. What is insurance in this world that we can't really imagine very well 40 years from now? And lastly, decisions for people who think they might want to buy a long-term care insurance policy are really complicated. These are far more complex decisions than are involved in thinking about acute care health insurance that many of us, in fact, are used to and thinking about over the next year. So the kinds of decisions involved in making the decision to buy a long-term care insurance policy involve thinking about how much money do I think I will have when I retire? How long am I likely to live past age 65? So how much money will I need over those years? Will I have enough money to pay my share of long-term care expenses if I also have an insurance policy? Or do I want to buy an insurance policy that might be cheaper per month or per year if I say I will pay the first year of needing expenses for long-term care services and then I want the insurance policy to kick in? Or do I want something which maybe the insurance policy kicks in after 3 months, where I pay the first 3 months? There are other parts of this decision process. You can see that it involves a lot of different decisions where if you don't have to make a choice today, you're going to say, let's go out to dinner and we'll talk about it later. And that is really why a market for private long-term care insurance has a very difficult time even emerging here in the United States. France is the only other country in the world that has a long-term care insurance market where people, in fact, buy long-term care insurance policies. About a third of the French do so. In other countries in Western Europe, it is forbidden to have a private market for long-term care insurance, largely because of these information problems, which make it very difficult to think through what is the product, how do I price it? And so the fear is that these insurance companies could either go bankrupt or the people buying them could end up being fleeced in some level because we really don't know what kinds of services will be needed 40 or 50 years from now. So next we're going to talk about some reform proposals that deal with the fact that we don't have a flourishing private market for private long-term care insurance.